This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Sean's my name, not Lord. Welcome to today's meeting of the Housing Committee. Members of the public may like to follow us at London Assembly on Twitter using the hashtag London Housing for this meeting. Please I remind participants to silence their electronic devices. Our main item of business this morning is young Londoners' access to home ownership. We invite young Londoners to let us know their views and help inform our investigation by taking part in our survey, which is now available on the GLA website and all of our social media channels. Can I now ask the clerk, Diane Richards, if you have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies have been received today.
Can I ask the committee to note recommendations set out at item 2 and ask members if they have any other interests to declare?
Noted.
Can we note the membership and chairing arrangements as agreed by the London Assembly on May the 4th, 2023?
Noted.
Can we note the committee's terms of reference as agreed by the London Assembly on May 4th, 2023?
Noted.
Can we note the standing delegation of authority to me as chairman of the committee as set out in our agenda?
Noted.
Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of February 2023?
Agreed.
Can we note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings and additional correspondence sent and received?
Noted.
Can we note the actions taken by the former chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members to agree the Women and Housing Report?
Noted.
The Unsafe and Unregulated London Rogue Supported Housing Providers Report,
Noted.
and the letter to the Mayor on the residents' voice in social housing.
Noted.
Can we also note the response from the Mayor to the Women and Housing Report?
Noted.
That brings us to our main item of business, young Londoners' access to home ownership. I would like to extend a warm welcome to our guests today, Tom Copley, Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development, and Deborah Halling, Senior Policy Officer, Housing and Land, Greater London Authority. Good morning to you both. It's good to see you. Tom's an old friend. Deborah, you're new to us, so welcome. Well, you're new to me, Deborah. So welcome to see you. I'd like to thank our guests. I've jumped right to the end. Excuse me.
That's a very short meeting.
Can we really thank them after they said something?
Yes. As you can see, my committee are the helpful type. Okay, we're gonna go to questions. As we all know, the Deputy Mayor in particular is very familiar with this format on both sides of the chamber. So I'll jump right in, Tom, and I'm going to start with: how is the Mayor supporting young people into home ownership in the capital?
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, can I say welcome to the Housing Committee and welcome to the Chair of the Housing Committee. It's a chair that I once sat in myself. It's the best one on the Assembly, in my view. So welcome. It's, as you know, a very important and interesting topic.
Thank
and
you.
I'm really glad that the Assembly is looking into the issue of how the housing crisis is affecting young Londoners and how young Londoners can be helped into home ownership. I think it would be remiss of me not to start by mentioning, because we've not had a housing committee since we published the figures for the 16 to 23 affordable homes programme. And the Mayor, of course, in fact, exceeded his target of delivering 116,000 affordable homes for Londoners. And in his speech just over at Royal Eden Dock, where he announced that he'd hit the target, he said this: even if young Londoners were to live Spartan-like lives, huge numbers would still struggle to eke out enough savings for a solicitor and a surveyor, never mind a serious deposit. Not when the average deposit for a first-time buyer in London has recently been as high as 150 grand. You could cut back on your Netflix subscription every month for the next 1,000 years, and it still wouldn't be enough to raise that frankly absurd sum. And I say that because we do occasionally read these rather ridiculous articles in the press that suggest that if only young people were to cut out avocados or things like that, that they'd be able to save for a deposit. But we all know in this room it's a lot more serious than that. And of those 116,000 homes that the Mayor has delivered, I'm very proud that a large number are for low-cost rent. And, of course, we have to remember that there'll be a lot of young people who will benefit from those new social rented homes, but also, of course, includes a large number of intermediate homes, and in particular shared ownership homes and also London living rent homes. And so one of the key levers and one of the primary levers that the Mayor can support young Londoners into their first steps in home ownership is through these tenures. We know that the average incomes of people who are accessing shared ownership are lower. And the deposits that they require are much smaller than those who are buying market sale homes. So this is something that's going to help people on lower incomes, younger Londoners onto the housing ladder. London Living Rent helps Londoners, and particularly young Londoners, save for a deposit through the lower rent that they receive through those two things. But of course, a lot more is needed. The Mayor has been very clear in terms of his lobbying of national government that he wants things like rent control, which will help particularly young Londoners living in the private rented sector, living in various insecure accommodation, paying extortionately high rents. He's been lobbying the government for the power to introduce that. That would significantly benefit young Londoners as well. I think I'd finish just by drawing out one sort of statistic that I find really striking, and always have ever since I first read it. I think it was in one of the Housing in London reports a few years ago. If you go back to 1990, a quarter of Londoners aged 16 to 24 owned their own home, which I think just in the current context would seem remarkable. It's obviously now below 10%, as you'd expect. But I think that just demonstrates how things have shifted, and not for the better, in London, and why it's absolutely vital that we take every action that we can in order to improve access to home ownership for all people, but particularly for young people at the moment.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a bit of a clarification. You said the Mayor has delivered 116,000 homes, but of course, you didn't use the word starts. Let's just put that on record. He delivered 116,000 starts. As members of this committee now, we will scrutinise the makeup of those figures in a separate meeting. Thank you.
I'm sure you will.
Yep, that's the job.
I would expect nothing less.
Just to say, you talked about rent control. Can you give us a little bit more detail on how you believe that will help young Londoners with home ownership?
Yes, absolutely. So as we've seen, particularly over the sort of medium to long term, and then following a brief dip during COVID, over the last 18 months or so, we have seen rapid rises in rents to quite extortionate levels. Young Londoners are much more likely to live in the private rented sector, and therefore would be much more likely to benefit from the implementation of some form of rent control in London. And of course, if rents are being held down for young Londoners, every penny that they're saving on their rent is a penny that they could be putting towards a deposit.
Do you think that the Mayor has done enough to find a home for those saved pennies? Are you happy with the products that you have? Do you think you're delivering high enough numbers?
In terms, I think that the introduction of the London Living Rent was one of the most significant ways the Mayor has been able to help young Londoners to save. It is, I think, a fantastic tenure. It's extremely popular. And it genuinely does allow young people. Genuinely does allow young people to save for that deposit for their first home. So yes.
I think we'll go into greater detail later on about London Living Rent. Let me ask you this then. Are you concerned about the impact of young people being unable to buy property in London?
Yes, I am. Of course. I think it's bad for young people on an individual level, particularly young people who want to put down roots here, young people who want to raise a family here. And actually, if you look at over the last I think since the early 2000s, what you've seen is in terms of net migration to London, you've seen an influx of people to London in their 20s and then an outflow in their 30s. When people are starting families, looking for more space, they're having to move out of London. That might not just be because of affordability reasons, of course. There might be other reasons why people, when they start a family, wish to move outside of London. But I think London's unaffordability is certainly going to have a significant impact on people's decisions. So there's that. But I think also on a sort of more macro level, if London continues to become more and more unaffordable, if it continues to become harder for the people that we need to work here to actually live here, then that's actually going to have a detrimental effect on London's economy. So I think it's both. I think it's it's bad for people personally, and it's going to be bad for London's success of a city if the people that we need to live here can't afford to live here.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. At this point, I'm going to go to Assemblyman Moema.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Deputy Mayor Copley. I wanted to just ask you to expand a little bit on the point that Assembly Member Bailey was talking about, kind of what might be the impact of not just rent control, but thinking of it from another perspective. The extent to which the high rents that we have here in London are acting as a barrier to home ownership. We have this absurd situation where if you're a social tenant, whether you're a council or housing association, you have a rent escalator in your rents. If you're a mortgage holder, then if Liz Truss hadn't happened, but from month to month for a fixed period how much your mortgage is going to be increasing. But if you're renting privately, you don't have that. So obviously there are issues around the disposable income you have, let alone the amount of money that you can save. But the impact of that on young Londoners in particular being able to save for a deposit.
Yes, I think you make a very good point there, Assembly Member Moema. It is the private rented sector is in this country and in London is insecure and uncertain. You are, and we've seen this quite clearly very recently with some of the very large rent increase demands that people have been facing. And of course, because the way the private rented sector in this country operates, in terms of power, the pendulum is very much towards the landlord. That makes it very, very difficult for tenants to push back on any landlord rent increase demand. And the effect of that, of course, is it makes it harder for people to have certainty about their future, to put down roots in their local area. It can be very disruptive, of course, for children, and more children are living in the private rented sector because they might have to move schools more regularly. Little things for people like, why would they bother to sort of to decorate and things like that, even if they're allowed to decorate, of course, because many landlords or many tenancies, I should say, because a lot of these tenancies are just the standard tenancy, stipulate that you're not allowed to. And it makes it very, very hard to have that certainty. And it certainly takes huge amounts out of people's pockets every month. And, I feel that, it has the effect. It has the effect not only of making it much more difficult for those tenants, but that means if this money is going to a landlord in rent, that money is not being spent in their local economy, for example, on their local high street. So I think there's a sort of ripple effect here. If we start to sort out the private rented sector, if we start to make it more affordable and more secure for people, we're going to get a ripple effect that's going to benefit not just the individual who's renting, but the local community and the local area as well.
Thank you. And just on that, then, we've had reports in the last few months about the impact of on business and on the economic situation here in London, of employers really being concerned that their employees, prospective employees, can't afford to live in London, and so what that means for economic growth. But do you know if the GLA has done any economic impact of the assessment of the impact of young people leaving London because of their lack of access to home ownership?
At this point, I might ask Deborah if Deborah, are you aware?
I'm not aware that we've done anything that specific.
Oh.
Sorry.
Microphone, please. Thank you.
Do I just
I
need
think
to get
it's
there, or
just
do I need to press?
there,
Okay. Just show myself up as a novice in this room. Yeah, I don't think the GLA has done anything that specific, but there's certainly been some research coming out, for example, the CBI about the impact. So I think recognise that kind of diagnosis of a problem from all sorts of employers.
Okay. And my final question, Chair. Whether or not both of you, if you think the cost of housing is a driver of the workforce crises that we've seen recently across London's public services.
I mean, I certainly think it will be exacerbating that, because if you're working in the public sector at the moment, you are already really, really struggling. You know, your pay is not keeping up with inflation. In fact, I think many of the the key public sector professions, I think I'm right in saying, in real terms, their pay is still lower, I think, than it was in sort of 2009, 2010. And yet your rents have been going up. Now, that's going to make it much harder for the key workers that we need to keep London running and to keep us safe and to keep us healthy and educated to live here. It's going to mean more people having to commute in, and as we know, commuting is neither cheap nor is it reliable with the state of the current national railway system. So I have absolutely no doubt that it will be having an impact on our public services, and if I can locate any GLA or other research which can quantify that, I'd certainly be happy to share it with you.
Okay, that would be very helpful. Finally, are young people benefiting from affordable home ownership products like London Living Rent and shared ownership? And do you have evidence to support that? And then the second part of that is whether or not City Hall collects data on the number of shared owners who increased their entry share into their home.
So on the second part of your question, we don't have data on just on sort of individual staircasing, but we do have data, I believe, and I'm trying to find the page in my briefing that has it, which tells us how many, number of cells resulting in 100% staircasing. So we know how many staircase to 100%, but we don't have all staircasing transactions. And again, I mean, I think this is in the public domain, but I'd be happy to share the 100% staircasing table with you. So last year, 21-22, 1,999 shared owners staircase to 100%.
Okay, so we obviously know how many people buy a shared ownership home, and you know how many people make it to 100%. So is there scope to look at whether or not people are making the 3 increments on that journey, or where they are?
So I don't think that housing associations or indeed councils that have shared ownership properties are required to share. They're certainly not required to share it with us, and I don't think they're required to share it with the government for the core database. I think it might be something that we've asked for the government to think about adding to the core database, but that's not something that they're doing at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Assembly Member Moama. Just quickly, Deputy Mayor, you talked about all of the benefits of, as you see them, of a rent cap. Do you see any risks?
I don't think that any policy is without risks. I think it's about how you minimise and mitigate those risks. I think the key thing about what the Mayor's proposals on rent control are is this is not about lifting and implementing some system from another city or another country and plonking it on London and saying, here we go, let's just go with it. He's developed his London model with some key principles, and he will set up a London Rent Commission, which will include a whole range of experts and stakeholders who would devise and implement a system that will work for London. And crucially within that, he's been very clear that the system needs to ensure that we don't deter, for example, build-to-rent, the build-to-rent sector, which is actually adding, of course, to the supply of housing in London. Any change can have issues and risks. It's about what the overall benefits are and how you minimise and mitigate any risks.
At risk of making this about rent controls rather than young people buying, isn't it quite hard for any government to give the Mayor powers if he doesn't say exactly what powers he's after? Shouldn't he develop his model and then say this is what we would like?
Well, he's developed the London model of renting, which is available on the GLA website, and it includes, for example, some key things. One certainly of which the government is now implementing, which is the implementation of open-ended tenancies, for example. That's being introduced through the Renters Reform Bill.
What I'm asking you, Deputy Mayor, is: does the Mayor have a cohesive, finished, signed, sealed, delivered package that he's asking for that then he can then say to government, this is what I want, yes or no?
Well, what he's proposing is to set up the London Rent Commission once he's got the powers for rent control. He's got the London model of renting, which established the key pillars of what's required. The London Rent Commission would then devise a system which would work, which would not minimise any risks, and which would ensure that we don't deter investment into the build-to-rent sector.
With all due respect, Deputy Mayor, that sounds like the cart before the horse. And if you look at the other example where the Mayor's talk about legalising certain types of drugs, he's doing the policy bit first, then our second. So there's an inconsistency there. But I give you to Assembly Member Devonish.
Isn't this an interesting subject? Have you had any discussions on this with Keir Starmer and his team?
I have to say I haven't personally spoken to Keir Starmer since he was my Member of Parliament, I think, back in the day. I haven't had any specific discussions recently with them, although I do expect to be talking to a number of people on the shadow front bench in the near future.
Isn't it true that they don't think this is a good idea either? And frankly, whether it's a Conservative government, a Labour government, maybe even a Green government, you're never going to get this daft idea through, are you?
I think if you want to know what the Labour front bench thinks, Tony, Assembly Member Devonish, I think you'd have to ask them.
I thought you were a member of the Labour Party.
I do not. It's to be very clear with you, Assembly Member Devonish. I'm here to represent the Mayor. I'm not here to represent the Labour Party.
Unless the two of them don't talk, Keir and Sadiq, that's probably the answer. Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor.
That was naughty.
Yes, thank you. Just to reassure you both, I have written to Sir Keir Starmer to ask him his view on these things, so neither of you need worry. Anyway, I give you Assembly Member Leonie Cooper.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
It's moving on to the next main question.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I did want to come in just to follow up on the last question.
If you don't mind. Oh, please. I didn't see your hand, but go ahead, Sean. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the issue of tracking staircasing, because we did, as a committee, write in 2020 about this, and really recommended that the recommendation was to the Mayor that the Mayor should be collecting data on staircasing, including like the amount that happened and how far people were along the trail, but also asking them why they were or were not doing more of that. And the reply from the mayor was a bit unclear as to whether or not that was something they were going to do. And I just wondered, do you know, is there anything to stop you making requirements for this to be reported? Because I've been asking MQs about this as well and only getting the 100% data back.
I don't think there's anything stopping us from requiring it, although given that the 21-26 Affordable Homes Programme is sort of getting underway, it becomes difficult to sort of add on. It becomes more difficult to add on new requirements after you've devised the programme, because of course providers will say, well, that's adding new burdens that we weren't necessarily aware of. I think we have placed quite a number of new requirements, including new reporting requirements on partners in this programme. And I think you always have to be mindful of the amount that you are asking versus the risk it then deters partners from bidding at all, because the whole process becomes too bureaucratic, if you see what I mean. So there has to be a balance. I'm not saying that it's an impossibility. I'm saying we just have to think about that balance, and also the fact it might be something that is better done nationally and collected nationally than in London. So nationally, it's reported to the I think it's the regulator gets the 100% staircasing data.
Okay. I mean, that is kind of what the answer says. So we asked for two things. We asked for the quantitative data on levels of staircasing, and then for a survey to be done. And the answer we got back seems to say we don't want to ask them to do burdensome surveys, and homeowners and shared owners might not be prepared to do that. And then it says, the priority would be just collecting data on rates of staircasing. And this is something that the providers must just know as a matter of course, and asking them to report that wouldn't be too onerous.
It's certainly something that we can look at. If this is something that is easily reportable to us, I don't see why not. Yes.
It would fit a recommendation that was made some time ago, and it would be really useful if you could look at that again. Thank you.
We'll note that as an action to take away.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Before we move on to Assembly Member Cooper, I'll give you another chance to answer this question, Deputy Mayor, because you missed it. Are young people benefiting from the affordable home ownership products such as London Living Rent and shared ownership? And what evidence do you have to support this? Clearly, you're going to say they are benefiting, but what evidence do you have?
Yes, I don't have it. Deborah, I might have to turn to you for this one, for the numbers.
Sure. I mean, one of the complexities of gauging who is securing intermediate housing is that up until very recently, the data that has been collected by government from housing providers has only covered shared ownership and not intermediate rent, including London Living Rent. So the picture is partial in terms of who's getting intermediate homes in London, and until now has only really robustly covered shared ownership. But there is some data, and some of this was set out in a housing research note which was published in summer 2020 on who's securing intermediate housing in London. And the sort of headline finding there was that the majority of those buying shared ownership homes in London were aged between 25 and 44 and were mostly moving from the private renters sector. So, yeah, it is sort of largely younger people who are securing those shared ownership homes. On London Living Rent, there's not the kind of robust data there, but from some engagement with housing providers who have secured funding from the Mayor to develop London Living Rent homes, they've certainly talked about a cohort in that kind of age bracket being the sort of predominant group who were pursuing and securing London Living Rent homes as well.
So you're effectively telling the committee that the mayor has funded some of these projects but has no data back from them?
No, the data is from the core database, which is...
No, what about London Living Rent?
So London Living Rent, until recently, the government's national database, the core database, did not did not report on intermediate rent. So there was no data nationally. It's worth noting as well, of course, that London Living Rent is a very new product. We've only been funding it, I think, since 2018. So you wouldn't expect there to be a vast amount of data yet, as compared to shared ownership, which has been.
I want to focus on London Living Rent because the mayor provides funds for that. Is it a case that the data hasn't come through yet because the programme is relatively young? Or is it a case that you haven't asked for the data in the first place?
So the data is reported to the government nationally. Until recently, the government did not report on intermediate rented products, of which London Living Rent is one.
But don't you think that you should want to know how effective the money that you're spending is?
Well, we know that the money is being spent effectively because we're delivering homes at London Living Rent.
Who is it benefiting? You've just told me you don't collect the data.
It's benefiting Londoners with household incomes below £60,000 who meet the qualification criteria for London Living Rent. So it is helping a group of Londoners who are likely to skew disproportionately towards younger Londoners anyway, to have a more affordable home and to save for a deposit. So I think we can safely say who it's benefiting. And now, if I could finish, the government is going to be publishing data on the age of people who are accessing intermediate rent. So that data should be available on the core database.
I'm disappointed that the mayor funds these things and doesn't automatically ask for the data. It would be useful.
Can I just add something on that, which is to say that I think that there is a reporting system in place, as Tom said, and that's run by government. So I think there would be a kind of potential confusion and administrative burden in setting up a kind of parallel reporting system, which is asking providers to submit data that's very similar to what they're already submitting to government. So I think the gap was that recording system didn't cover intermediate rent, and that partly reflects the fact that London Living Rent is a London-specific, distinctive product that the mayor developed and secured permission from the government to fund. So the mayor's housing team pushed government to add intermediate rent to that reporting system so that data that is there and is there to be kind of scrutinised in terms of who's getting intermediate homes, so that would cover intermediate rent. And unfortunately that has kind of taken a number of years for that to happen, and it's only just been added to reporting requirements. But we are sort of looking forward to that data extending to cover intermediate rent from here on in.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Well, it's very kind of you, Chair, to ask most of Assembly Member Devonish's questions and indeed mine on the next two sections on intermediate housing, London Living Rent and shared ownership. Very thoughtful.
I wouldn't have got away with that in my day as Chair.
I'm going to see if I can find something that I can still ask you that the Chair hasn't already covered from the areas that I'm planning to focus on. What do we know about the demand for shared ownership and London Living Rent properties, and is it being met by supply? We were looking at figures where the Homes for Londoners portal was accessed on the 1st of June, so just a few days ago, that showed 532 available shared ownership homes and eight London Living Rent
Sorry, could
homes.
you repeat that, Member Cooper?
What do we know about demand for shared ownership in London Living Rent homes, and is the supply really there to meet it if on the London Homes for Londoners portal we could only see 532 shared ownership and only 8 London Living Rent, bearing in mind some people don't actually want shared ownership, but 8 London Living Rent is quite low.
So it's so to distinguish here, we've assessed the need for intermediate homes, and that's set out in the Strategic Housing Market Assessment and in the London Plan. It's difficult to gauge. I think it might be impossible to gauge demand for intermediate housing in the way that you can for social housing, because, of course, social housing, you have the housing waiting list, and it's very, very clear. Intermediate housing, shared ownership, you don't have that system. Some boroughs do have intermediate housing lists for nomination to shared ownership homes and other intermediate homes, but by no means all of them. So I think it is a little bit difficult to gauge the demand.
So
there's been a change of chair.
Oh, we're just seamless here. Just in terms of the SHMA, are we talking about the Strategic Housing Market Assessment that dates from 2017? So, if you don't mind me saying so, I would personally consider that to be a little bit out of date, and I wonder if you would agree with me, and are we likely to be refreshing those figures?
So the SHMA and indeed the SHLA will be refreshed in the run-up to it's a huge piece of work, as you know, in the run-up to the next London plan, which is likely to be in the next mayoral term. So, yes, I mean, those figures are a little bit out of date now, but I think anecdotally, there's no lack of, certainly what I hear when speaking to providers, there's no lack of demand for intermediate housing. And interestingly, there was a worry, quite widespread among the sector, that following the what was it called, fiscal event last year with interest rates. Do you remember that? Interest rates going up.
I certainly do, because I have a mortgage, and my mortgage has gone up as a result of it. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Indeed. As do a great many Londoners who have been affected by that. And we were very worried that the interest rates going up, mortgage rates going up, would make it harder for people to afford shared ownership, would reduce demand for shared ownership. That's actually not been the case. In fact, I think many providers report the opposite's true. And I think one of the key reasons for that is the end of Help to Buy. So the end of Help to Buy has actually boosted shared ownership, because fewer people and given the demographics of people, first-time buyers accessing Help to Buy, fewer younger people will now be able to buy a home outright. So actually, I think we've been seeing an increase in demand for shared ownership.
Well, I'll try very hard not to poach into colleagues' questions, so I think we might come back to Help to Buy at some point in the future of this meeting. But we were wondering, to what extent does the GLA's Housing and Land team take into account young Londoners' needs? And young, I think, now goes up to 40, really, in terms of...
I'm delighted to hear that.
Access to the housing market. That's, I think, is roughly where the sort of drop-off is in terms of home ownership. So to what extent does the GLA take young Londoners into account when designing affordable housing products?
Sure. So as with everything that we do across the GLA, an equality impact assessment is produced. That includes, of course, our affordable homes programmes and the Mayor's other housing capital programmes and other policies within the Housing and Land Directorate. So yes, young Londoners' needs are taken into account through that process.
And my understanding is that the prioritisation of key workers for intermediate housing is negatively impacting on younger people's access to home ownership. And I think that's something that came out of the March 2021 Equality Impact Assessment on Intermediate Housing. So I mean, obviously that's competing demands, really, isn't it? Because obviously care workers are not necessarily under 40. They can be of any age, and obviously, you know, a critical group for us to house, particularly given the sort of crisis that's going on in adult social care, where, you know, we know that salaries have been frozen for many years. So really do need access to as many intermediate and low-cost products as possible.
I actually have to say, as a member of the I wasn't aware of that particular tension that you just outlined. As you know, the Mayor's been sort of very clear about ensuring that key workers are prioritised. Key workers, of course, do include and will include young people, and this the work that's already been done is strengthened through the draft London Plan guidance, which is out at the moment. But I think through all of this, you can never get away from the fact that if we're going to ensure that all of the groups that we need to help are being helped, we need to massively increase the supply of housing and affordable housing, and for that we need considerable additional funding from the government.
So the bit in the Equality Impact Assessment said, providing funding that focuses on investment in homes exclusively for key workers could potentially reduce the resource available to deliver intermediate housing for households who may be in greater need of intermediate housing but who do not fit the definition of key workers. For instance, most key workers in London are aged between 35 and 60, so in the older cohort. However, those Londoners between the ages of 25 and 34 are most likely to need support to access affordable.
Sorry, yes, I think I misheard you before I said Member Cooper, but yes, I recall the section that you mentioned. Yes.
Anything we can do?
There could be. Well, as I say, it comes back to the need to increase the overall supply of intermediate and overall affordable housing.
But can we just be clear that it's not just increasing supply? Because between 2000 and, I don't know, just choose random dates, 2008 and 16, which I think coincided with another mayor's tenure, we were producing a lot of properties, but they weren't at low cost or intermediate price points, were they? And so, in fact, from 2016 onwards, we've been trying to address an overall deficit from that unfortunate previous 8-year period, which I mean, may or may not have related to a mayor of a different political complexion, but obviously you're not political. Deputy Mayor.
I couldn't possibly comment on such things, but certainly we've seen a big shift. It's much, we've seen a shift away from the assertion by a previous mayor that 80% of market rent was somehow affordable. That has certainly shifted completely. Now, and in fact now through the 21-26 Affordable Homes Programme, all of the low-cost rented homes will be at social rent levels.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor.
Deborah.
Oh, sorry, Deborah, did you want to come in as well?
Just a couple of things to mention on key worker prioritisation and the sort of tensions between competing demands. So the Mayor prepared a list of key workers and encourages local authorities and housing providers to use that in allocating intermediate housing. I'm sure you're aware, and I guess it's worth just flagging that list we think covers about 30% of Londoners. So the definition of key worker is quite broad. And I think the other thing on key worker prioritisation is that isn't necessarily about schemes that are, as that extract from the Equality Impact Assessment that you read put it, exclusively for key workers. And the draft London Plan guidance that's currently out for consultation does encourage local authorities to prioritise in a way that reflects local need and circumstances. So there's hopefully scope for that not to be a kind of overly blunt tool.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Davidish.
Thank you, Chair. I know we've covered a little bit of this, but I'm just going to probably ask the questions again with slight different emphasis. How is the Mayor monitoring the impact of his London Living Rent scheme? And can you be specific examples, please, Deputy Mayor?
Sorry, how is the Mayor monitoring
the impact of his London Living Rent scheme?
Well, I think the key impact is the homes that have been delivered for Londoners to live in. I'm not sure by what you mean by monitoring the impact. Sorry.
Well, I guess by monitoring the impact, we're talking about, there's a huge housing crisis in London. We all agreed that in 2016, and it's the cause and effect really that we're talking about. I'm going to come on and ask you about the numbers, but we're talking about at the moment you've started 2,999 starts in 7 years. Do you think that's really having an impact?
Yes, I certainly think the benefits to the people who are moving into those homes will be immense in terms of the savings that they make. And in fact, I recall reading in the Evening Standard a very glowing article interviewing a family who'd moved into a London Living Rent home in Waltham Forest and the change it had made on their lives, the ability for people perhaps to move and stay within their local community rather than having to move outside of the local community. But certainly it's a scheme that is, as I mentioned earlier, still in its infancy, really. It's only been funded since around 2018. But I think the difference that it's making for the families that are benefiting would be immense.
I don't think we disagree with that, but I think the point is, Deputy Mayor, it is only less than 3,000 people. How many?
Well, 3,000 households.
Yeah, okay, 3,000 households.
3,000
So
households.
how many of these have actually been completed so far?
I'd have to consult my table for that, which I don't think I've got in front of me. But that's all publicly available, Assembly Member Devonish. I'm sure you've got it in front of you, in fact.
I'm very surprised you haven't got that number in front of you.
I'll just. I've got the.
I think we've discussed already the point of the next question, but I'll read it out for the record anyway. Have any LR residents purchased their homes to date? And I think the answer was there was a handful, wasn't there?
Sorry, how many?
Have any of the London Living Rent and shared ownership of those 3,000, have any of them purchased their homes to date?
I'd have to write to you with that information, Assembly Member Devonish, but I think it would be a handful.
Okay, and does the Mayor have a target for how many of these homes are delivered and how many people move into the home ownership as a result in its entirety?
I don't. There's a target for. Well, the London Living Rent homes that are funded through the AHP, after 10 years, they are required to go over to shared ownership. So, I guess the idea is that they will all become shared ownership homes once the 10-year period has expired.
But you haven't got a larger figure that you're aiming to, other than.
Oh, do you mean a larger figure in terms of delivery?
The number you've actually delivered at the end of the programme.
The 1623 programme?
No, the whole programme, 1623. Yes.
Well, the target would be for all of those homes that have been, the London Living Rent homes that have been started, to have been completed. Yes.
Okay. How does the Housing Association support these tenants to move into home ownership, and what is known about the level of savings being achieved by tenants in LLRs?
I'm not aware of any data, I'm looking at Deborah now, on the levels of savings within of residents within LLRs. Is that something that we've captured?
It's not something the GLA monitors, though. No, we have had some conversations with providers who are delivering London Rent and asked them about the whole issue of supporting tenants to save. And I think there are a sort of variety of approaches, not normally kind of accompanied with keeping track of each individual tenant's exact savings, but often things like sort of periodic reviews every 6 months or every year, speaking to tenants about how they're progressing with savings. Also, a number of providers have arrangements with independent financial advisors, and they offer opportunities for their London Living Rent tenants to have kind of regular conversations with those advisors. So I think there are sort of a range of approaches out there. I think, given that London Living Rent is a sort of still a relatively new tenure, there is appetite that I've certainly seen in conversations we've had with providers about learning from each other about those different approaches and what works well in terms of helping tenants to save. There's also scope to kind of work in tandem with some of the other provisions that government has put in place. So, for example, the lifetime ISA might be a way that a London Living Rent tenant could save what they're not paying on private rent, so that they can buy a share of their home. And certainly there were a number of reports from providers of tenants buying a share of their home, which, given that a lot of the London Living Rent homes have only been completed for just a few years, it's fairly kind of early days for those tenants to have saved enough to buy shares, but certainly some of them are doing that.
Thank you. I think the next question may have been covered, but I'll ask it just for the record. Government now requires local authorities and housing associations to report on intermediate rent through the core data set. What impact will this have on your ability to monitor the outcomes from London Living Rent? So I think you answered that already, didn't you?
I think so. I think it's very welcome that the government are now including this, and I think the Assembly will find it useful as well.
Thank you. Does this, in your view, go far enough to understand whether the London Living Rent is working as an affordable housing product, particularly for young people, or is there anything else you'd want?
So yeah, we've actually been pushing the government to sort of add a number of other things to the core database as well. So, for example, the kind of professions of people that are moving into whether it's shared ownership or intermediate rented homes. I think that kind of thing would be quite useful as well. Again, and returning to the questions about the key workers, looking at that would help us to monitor whether the Mayor's policies around prioritising key workers are having the impact that we would like to have. So I would suggest that kind of thing is included.
Thank you. And what impact would the proposed increase of the income eligibility cap to 67,000 for London Living Rent have on your young people?
I think it will be. I think potentially it could be very beneficial. As you know, that limit has not increased since I think 2017. Obviously, things have moved on quite a bit. Then inflation's gone up, and if we're talking, the people, that income cap now would rule out, say, two households earning, 31,000, two individuals earning £31,000 each. That's going to exclude quite a lot of key workers as well, for example. So I think potentially moving up to 67,000 cap is a way of expanding this access to this product for the young people that we want to benefit from it.
And does the Mayor see shared ownership as the primary product in enabling young people into home ownership?
I mean, I would like us to do a lot more London Living Rent is the honest truth. I think that shared ownership is inevitably, over the next few years, probably going to be the primary product because, to a large degree, because it's a product that providers are familiar with. It's been around a very long time, and although there have been a number of changes to it, welcome changes to it, the model of shared ownership has, the new model of shared ownership that we're now funding is different to the previous one. It's something that providers are much more familiar with. London Living Rent being a newer product, perhaps some providers are a little more reluctant to go for it in large numbers, but I hope that as it's proven as a form of tenure, we will see a greater uptake because I think there are big benefits to residents from London Living Rent.
And just finally, and this is a slightly different point, but I do think that when you're talking at only 3,000 units, we're not talking a bit of a drop in the ocean compared to the housing crisis. Will you be able to write to us, where we talked about in previous meetings that you were potentially looking at setting up a development company as the GLA? Are you able to write to the committee of an update of, we haven't discussed that for many months, where you are in whether or not you are going to do that? Because something like that may make the step change. This clearly, although a worthy product, isn't going to make the step change. 3,000 units isn't much for London's housing crisis.
Oh, sorry, you wanted a specific update on the City Hall developer?
Yes.
Can I just intervene there, because the committee may come back to that topic at a later date?
I'm just asking him to write for more information, not to discuss it now.
Okay, I think we can take an action to write
Chair.
to the Chair updating the Assembly on progress.
Okay.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Berry?
Okay, I have 2 issues to follow up on from this section, if that's all right with you.
As long as you're swift.
I'll be as quick as I can. I've been waiting since
I need
question
a promise
8
that you'll
to
be
come
swift.
in. Just to go back to looking at the overall numbers, Tom, if that's okay, because there's 2 things. There's 2 types of London Living Rent, aren't there? There's the funded product that we've got the figures of. That's where the number 3,000 comes from. Then you've also got London Living Rent as a benchmark that's used by developers who are doing unfunded affordable homes as part of their obligations as developers. Are you keeping track of the London Living Rent homes that are being developed that way, the ones that are using that as a benchmark rather than a product into home ownership?
That is a very interesting question.
I know you're not the planning
They would
deputy
probably,
mayor.
I would. I'd probably want to come back to you in writing to confirm this, but I think that where developers are delivering London Living Rent in perpetuity as part of their Section 106 obligations, and where they are captured as nil grant starts under the AHP, I think they would fall under the other intermediate category. But I would rather confirm that to you in writing, because I think most of the time, I think a lot of the time when developers do that, it's a form of discount market rent that is benchmarked at London Living Rent.
Exactly that. The previous benchmark was 80%, and that wasn't very affordable. So we've done a good thing in our planning rules,
exactly.
bringing that down.
So what that will mean is essentially you've got the London Living Rent, which you can see clearly through the stats, that is the 10 years and then shared ownership, and then you'll have another set which are essentially London Living Rent in perpetuity that are delivered by developers as part of their Section 106.
Okay, it'd be really useful, because I would imagine there are quite a few coming through, particularly as part of build-to-rent developments.
Correct.
And yet, as Assemblymember Cooper was pointing out, when you go on the Homes for Londoners website, which I think you only basically see the funded homes there, and you're looking for rent, you can very rarely find anything there. And again, trying to make sure that you're properly linking up with the people providing that product would be useful.
Providers should be listing those. Certainly our sort of our big providers, our strategic providers, as were.
I think affordable housing providers
are obliged to list them,
but not developers who are merely doing that as part of their planning obligations. I think that's my instinct. Yeah,
that's an interesting point, and I think I will come back to you on both. We'll take that away just to come back to you, just to confirm where they're captured, and if we can actually specifically draw out within our other intermediate category the ones that are London Living Rent, and indeed whether or not they're obliged to list them or do list them on the portal.
And the reason I'm asking in the topic of this meeting, just to be clear, the reason why it's in scope for the meeting is because if you're renting at a lower rate like that, you can also save up for a home in the same kind of way. And what we'd want to know is the relative effectiveness of that versus your London Living Rent funded product and versus shared ownership, where our previous investigation found there are lots of additional costs, things like major works costs and service charges and things that add up, and potentially shared ownership isn't the best way to reach full home ownership. But we can't compare that when we're not knowing who those people are.
I think you're absolutely right at that point. If you've got a discount, if you've got a London Living Rent that is in perpetuity, you can still save that money every month.
But no one's keeping an eye on you. So do we know if it's effective or not? Exactly. And then my second question is about the data that Deborah mentioned earlier. The sort of the not very extensive and quite old data from the core database that was in the research note, looking at the demographics of people who were moving into shared ownership, and what I really noticed from that was that it's not very representative of Londoners. There's a lean towards white people. More white people are using shared ownership than the general population who are moving, and fewer black people, and that that is a bit of a flag to me in general terms when we're talking about policy. The other statistic that we found in that data was that only 1.3% of households moving in shared ownership had a household member with a disability. And that seems very wrong. And I wanted to know, since that data is relatively old, if there's anything you've done since then about those disparities.
Do we have any? I was going to ask if you have any more up-to-date data. We presume you need to pull it out of the core database.
Yeah, that data is kept on core, and we could source some more updated information from them. But that, with the caveat that I mentioned before, that only covers shared ownership and not London Living Rent, where the impression that providers give is that the demographic looks a little bit different.
Assemblymember Sheikh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'd certainly be interested in some of that data as Assemblymember Berry was talking about. I found that particularly interesting in terms of the benchmark LLR. Good morning. Good to be joining the first Housing Committee.
Welcome to the Housing Committee.
Thank you. I'm not going to lie to you. I am slightly overwhelmed by the amount of data and knowledge that everyone seems to have. So hopefully I'll be able to keep up. So I wanted to, just before I move on to my substantial questions on the affordable homes programme, just sort of quickly round up some of the questions that Assemblymember Berry was asking around shared ownership. The first one, just so that it flows appropriately, could you just actually, Tom, or Deputy Mayor, just expand a little bit more on the kind of impact of service costs on shared ownership, and whether you think that actually that can add an additional hurdle for young people who are trying to access home ownership?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge that there is some deep dissatisfaction out there from a significant, I would say probably a minority, but a significant minority of shared owners regarding service charges, and we should acknowledge that. And the Mayor does not have the power to deliver changes to service charges that we all might like to see. I think collectively between the Mayor and the Assembly, we would like to see regarding service charges, regarding leasehold reform, for example, and we've now which would impact shared owners positively. Leasehold reform, which we've seen the government, unfortunately, I can't remember if it was watering down or putting on ice. But for example, a requirement for providers to pursue value for money in service charges, that would require legislation. What the Mayor does do, of course, is have the Service Charges Charter, which was recently updated and which all partners are expected to sign up to. And what this does is gives us at the GLA a way of escalating complaints and holding providers a little bit their feet to the fire if they're not behaving according to their obligations. But of course, for legal force, that would require legislative change.
Thank you. That was really substantive and helpful. So I'm going to drill down into a couple of things that you said. So I think great to acknowledge it, no power to deliver it. However, we do have a service providers charter that we expect partners to sign up to so that we can escalate complaints. When we say we expect partners to sign up to it, does that mean we don't have all our partners signed up to it currently?
There is a list on the website. I'm not aware of any that aren't, unless Deborah is aware.
No, I think there's a bit of work to be done to just update that list on the website, but that is a clear expectation for any providers allocated funding to develop shared ownership homes through the 21-26 programme to sign up to that.
Brilliant, thank you. If Chair obliges, could we have an updated list to ensure that all partners we work with are signed up to that charter, and if not, perhaps even a commitment for you to write to them and remind them of that expectation?
Certainly, we'd be happy to, and we welcome Assembly members chasing them as well, particularly if you've got significant.
Should we do a joint letter?
Particularly if you've got significant numbers of. Why not?
Why not? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to move on as well, just to follow up on the point that Assemblymember Devenish was making around, if I can find my question, the affordability caps. So the proposed increase to the eligibility cap, to 67,000, I think is welcome for all the reasons you've outlined, Deputy Mayor. I wanted to just ask, given the income to rent ratios in the private sector, do you think Londoners with incomes above 67,000 would benefit from further support to access home ownership?
So I think given the extent of the housing crisis in London, yes, it's clear that households earning more than £67,000 still struggle to access home ownership, and I think that is evidenced by the fact that the cap for shared ownership in the London plan is £90,000 for a household. And we're not proposing to alter that, but we are proposing we are consulting on raising the intermediate rent cap to £67,000, as you say. But I think this just goes to show the real scale of the housing crisis in London and the struggle that people on incomes perhaps outside of London would be considered, very sort of decent household incomes, but within London, just not possible to get on the housing ladder.
Absolutely, I can echo your points more strongly. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the Affordable Homes Programme. Just a couple of more questions that I know that have sort of been touched upon by my colleagues, but just to reiterate them. So with the 2016-2023 Affordable Homes Programme target, in terms of shared ownership and London living rent, and I think that the target was to deliver at least 58,500 shared ownership and London living rent homes. Could you tell us a little bit more about why that target wasn't met and what we can do to ensure next time our targets are?
Absolutely. So just to be clear, the global target that the Mayor was accountable for and which the government set was 116,000, which of course we exceeded by 782 homes, which I'm delighted about. As you know, the programme was devised and agreed with the government in 2016 under a different Prime Minister, a different Secretary of State. In fact, I think we've perhaps had 5 or 6 Secretaries of State since then, depending on if you count Michael Gove twice. And it's fair to say there's been quite a shift, although there's been quite a shift in terms of the government's attitude towards different affordable tenures. So when the Affordable Homes Programme was agreed, the government of the day wouldn't even allow us to do social rent. They said you have to do 50% intermediate, mainly shared ownership, and we got them to, my predecessor and the Mayor got them to agree that London living rent could be included in that if it led to shared ownership. And the low-cost rent all had to be affordable rent. The Mayor said 80% affordable rent is not affordable, and the way around that was to create London affordable rent, which was benchmarked at social rent level. So essentially, we were able to fund social rent almost through the back door to ensure it was affordable for Londoners. Over the years, things shifted, and the government then said, well, now you can do social rent on the low-cost rented side. And towards the end, it became, the Mayor had been pushing consistently to be able to do, within the programme, more homes for low-cost rent, more homes for social rent. And things sort of aligned, really, under Michael Gove, who was also very much shifted from his predecessor, who was very focused on shared ownership and first homes, much more towards social rent. So by agreement with the government, the balance of the programme ended up shifting towards low-cost rent, which is really where the Mayor wanted it to be, because that is where the greatest need in London is. Still delivered significant numbers of intermediate homes, shared ownership and London living rent, but I'm very pleased to say we were able to deliver even more social rent than we'd originally envisaged, and that's even more remarkable given the economic circumstances and the fact that social rent is much more expensive to fund.
Yeah, thank you. That's really informative. And I think I'll just move on to my last question, because I think you've covered my next, which is the 2021-2026 Affordable Homes Programme that we're talking about does not have a fixed grant rate, as I understand it. Are you expecting a high proportion of London living rent homes to be delivered as a result of this change?
So what this allows is for providers essentially to bid for what they need, and obviously then we make a value for money assessment of the bids. We do have bids in for London living rent. There is still, though, just going back to what I was saying to Assembly Member Cooper earlier about shared ownership, providers still see considerable demand for shared ownership, so there's still going to be quite a share of that that's going to be shared ownership. the majority, in fact, I think quite a significant majority is going to be for social rent. But there are going to be London Living Rent homes funded through the programme. The overall programme, though, as you know, is smaller than the previous programme.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll pass over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Assembly Member Sheikh. Let me address this as Deputy Mayor. Is the Mayor's first dibs scheme still running?
So yes, providers are still expected to market homes under first dibs. Let me start again. Market homes under £350,000 in London. They're expected to market those to Londoners first. However, it's not currently being actively monitored. So they are still expected to market those homes.
So my next question may be difficult to answer then. So what impact has the scheme had? How many homes have been marketed through it?
I'm just trying to get you the figures. So during the first 18 months, there were 256 homes that were offered under first dibs.
Okay.
I think that reflects the fact. Sorry, just to continue, Chair. I think that reflects the fact that, of course, £350,000, the threshold in the context of London, particularly now, is quite a low amount.
That neatly brings me on to my next question then. Does the Mayor have any plans to update the scheme to reflect the significant rise in property costs in London?
We don't have any current plans to do that, no. Although the Mayor has... although I would note there are perhaps some national... I think the Labour front bench has announced potentially a first dibs scheme proposals, which we will look at with interest, but there are no proposals at the moment to update the threshold.
Don't you think it needs looking at? The scheme was introduced in 2018, where's 5 years on? Don't you think it's time to look at it? We all know that property costs have skyrocketed, and it makes the scheme irrelevant if it isn't looked at again, some would say.
I think in terms of ensuring that Londoners are benefiting, because one of the issues around one of the reasons for first dibs was ensuring that Londoners would benefit from homes that were sold in London rather than them being sort of marketed immediately and sold immediately, sometimes off plan, of course, overseas. And the Mayor has been calling for a number of other policies which will help us to target some of those overseas buyers. So he's called on the government to raise taxes on foreign property owners by increasing the empty homes premium for overseas owners of empty properties, increasing capital gains tax from 28% to 40% for overseas buyers, and to raise the annual tax on envelope dwellings for overseas companies with large property portfolios. So we are pushing for things which will allow us to target some of that, some of that overseas finance, which we could then reinvest in affordable homes for Londoners.
So you don't see any value in this particular scheme then? You did correct me if I'm wrong.
I do certainly think it has value. I'd be happy to take that away and have a look at it, Assembly Member Bailey. But at the moment, we don't have any plans to update the threshold.
Okay, we'll be grateful to have a look at that.
Sorry, I think Deborah.
Sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just to note that sort of threshold for first dibs wasn't something that the Mayor set, because first dibs is very much a voluntary offer from developers. So I think that is kind of how any change in the threshold would need to proceed.
But surely
that's a very good point.
But surely it would be better coming from the Mayor, him being the central point, the convening point, to at least make a suggestion. rather than hope that one of the providers would come up with one. Because, of course, if a provider comes up with it, that doesn't encourage the other providers to do the same.
No, of course, but I think, you know, it's one of those areas where I suppose there's a balancing act, isn't there? You need to come up with a threshold that benefits enough people, but not one which will mean that no developer will sign up to it, as it were.
Yes. But again, it's a proposal that we are all looking for. Let me move on to the next question. Has your pocket living... Hold on. This isn't written correctly. Has the GLA's partnership with Pocket Living been successful in enabling young people to access home ownership?
So yes, Pocket Living, as you know, are a partner of the GLA in receipt of a funding mechanism. I think that I don't have the specific data relating to who moves into Pocket Living homes in front of me. I'm sure that could be provided to you, but I am aware that that the people that do benefit from these discount market sale homes tend to be, I don't particularly like this term, but young professionals. I don't know if there's a better term than that. But I think that Pocket themselves have, and perhaps indeed have published online, the demographics of the people that benefit from their particular homes.
So could you provide us with those figures?
I'm sure we could.
In demographic terms, but just in pure numbers terms of how many, where, when, who, why?
I'm sure we could provide you with those figures, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does the GLA intend to invest or support the delivery of any other discount market sale products now that the AHP 2016-23 programme has finished?
No, we do not. We can't through the 21 to 26 Affordable Homes Programme because the government has the government stipulates that we can't, as it were. So the only intermediate products that we can fund are shared ownership and London Living Rent. So we will no longer be funding homes for discount market sale going forward.
Okay, that's a definitive answer. My final question is, what is the Mayor doing to support young people to engage with community-led home ownership schemes, such as community land trusts?
Absolutely. So, as you all know, the main mechanism through which the Mayor supports community land trusts is his Community Housing Fund, which supports community land trusts to deliver affordable homes. Many of which I should just say, going back to going back to your previous point about discount market sale, I should probably caveat it with there will be homes funded through the community housing scheme that are discount market sale, because that is a common way in which community land trusts deliver their affordable housing. So just to clarify that point. But as you know, the numbers that we have funding for under the Community Housing Fund are around 500 homes. So it's a relatively small, though important, part of the Mayor's funding programmes. And we support community land trusts and community organisations in two ways. So firstly, we provide them with revenue funding in order to design schemes, get through planning and things like that. And then we also fund them on the capital side to actually build the homes themselves. It is a very important part of what we do, and we want to see more of it. It is, of course, very difficult because we're dealing with very, very small organisations who require a lot of expertise and support to get schemes through. But I think these can be incredibly beneficial schemes. A little while ago, I was at the topping out ceremony for a scheme in Lewisham, near to where I live, where the residents themselves actually do some of the work themselves. So the people that are moving into the properties actually commit some of their time to essentially building and finishing the properties, and in exchange they get a discount on either their rent or their on their rent. So I think it's something that we need that we absolutely want to support and do more of.
You use the figure of 500. How many properties has the Mayor delivered under this scheme so far?
We've provided funding for around I think it's 256. That's a number I've got in my head. We provided revenue support for.
Over what
but
period?
I might have to double check and confirm that. But this is all reported through the Mayor's reporting.
Okay. Assembly Member Barry?
Are we on to the next section?
Yes, we are.
So, Tom, this section is about the Help to Buy scheme from the government. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, do you think that has been an effective product for young Londoners accessing home ownership? And in addition, do you recognise that it has helped to increase housing supply overall? And do you know how much of the total funding for this went to London?
So there's no doubt that it has helped Londoners to buy homes. In fact, in 21-22, around 5,700 homes bought in London were bought through Help to Buy, and I would note that the majority of those purchases were in outer London. However, my concern throughout and consistently has been that as a demand-side intervention, it's helped to inflate house prices. Now, developers would argue that these homes wouldn't have been built were it not for Help to Buy. So there's kind of you get into a bit of a circular argument about this. I think my view on where government investment and government resource is best spent in housing is not on initiatives like Help to Buy. It's on directly grant funding, affordable housing, and particularly homes for low-cost rent. And that can help private development as well, because, of course, private developers, if they know that they can sell a chunk of the scheme to a housing provider as affordable housing, that helps de-risk the whole scheme. So you could say, as Assembly Member Berry, that I was perhaps ambivalent at best about the Help to Buy scheme. I think it was Henry Pryor that called it the crack cocaine of the housing market or something like that. But I think there are better ways to support people into home ownership.
Thank you very much. So you said that during the year 21 to 22 there were 5,700 homes under this scheme in London.
Yep.
Do you know how much money that was put in by the government into that?
I don't.
Because it's really hard. There's an average, but yeah.
I'm sure it could be calculated. And that's 5,700 first-time buyers who are helped. I think the interesting question, and what we don't know, and what I don't think can be quantified, is how many of those first-time buyers would have been able to buy anyway, potentially. I think that's a sort of unknowable. That's an unknowable thing. But I think the government reports on how much it spends on on the Help to Buy scheme.
Great, thank you. So I'm trying to do some calculations on my phone. I'm not sending text messages. I'm trying to add up some numbers. So yeah, are you doing anything to keep an eye on the demographics of the people? You mentioned, like, would they be people who could buy anyway? There's some basic information that's come from the government that the median household income for a first-time buyer in London under the scheme was £65,684, and also that those people were borrowing 6 times their salary even with the scheme to buy the home. So are you getting any more information about, what kinds of Londoners those are? Are those, like with the shared ownership, do we know if they're single or couples or key workers?
Given that this is a government programme, not a GLA programme, I don't think this is something that we would automatically have data on. It may be that we can pick up certain things through the annual housing and London report. interesting. I was interested. You said was it £67,000 was the average?
65,684 is the median that was given.
Was the median?
The median income.
Income, yes, because of course that's considerably higher than the median household income of people who access shared ownership, which is around 48. I think it was around £48,000 the other year. So it just goes to show in terms of the levels, the affordability for people who are able to access these various things. Shared ownership certainly seems to be benefiting households on lower incomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a cost benefit point of view, it'd be really useful to know the average amount that was going in public subsidy, and then also the amount that people were being helped from different tenures, because you can get a really good idea of that then. And the more you can tell us about that, the better, I think. If you could just go and find out a bit more, that would be really useful.
I think we can take that away as an action. Yeah.
Okay. And then obviously the fiscal event that you've previously mentioned has created a few issues. We do know that there are reports that 1 in 8 of the properties across the country has lost value. And I think you said before, where there were questions about whether or not the homes were really additional. I think there were questions about whether the homes were perhaps overpriced in terms of that, if they've preferentially lost value.
Sorry, could you start the question again? Sorry, yes.
We have a report from the Times that across the country, 1 in 8 of the homes bought under Help to Buy has now dropped in value since it was bought, which does raise questions about whether the subsidy was used to inflate prices, I think.
Yes.
But obviously there's a crisis in the economy more generally. There's also the issue of interest rates, because people are now starting to enter the phase where they have to
repay the loan to the government.
Yes. And they're also obviously facing a mortgage that they also took out. When we know people were leveraged as hard as they were, this is obviously a bit of a brewing issue. So are you concerned about this and monitoring this and in contact with any people who represent those Help to Buy customers who might now be facing difficulties in London?
So interestingly, on the latter point, I, to my knowledge, have not been contacted by anyone or any group that is representing those. Obviously, I am contacted quite regularly and quite rightly by groups who are affected by particular issues, leaseholders, for example. To my knowledge, I've not been contacted by anyone who's affected by this. I'm glad that you flagged it, because certainly I think you're right that this could be a brewing problem. It's not. I don't think it's something that we are particularly tracking. It might be something that we need to go away and have a look at, just to see if we can get ahead of any sort of mounting problems. But going back to what I said earlier, I think that I'm ambivalent at best about this, and something that might have seemed like an excellent investment at the time, you're still taking on a very, very large debt and investment whose value may go down as well as up, and perhaps people weren't necessarily made aware in the way that they should be of what their costs might be coming up further down the line, particularly at a time when interest rates were historically low. I think it's an interesting point about that as well, because I think people got very used to the idea that this was normal for interest rates to be that low. Of course, historically, that was not normal, that was abnormal. But it's a very interesting point, perhaps something that we need to have a bit of a look at. But I would stress that this is a government policy, and they themselves as well should be paying close attention to and monitoring this.
Yeah, I think it would be good to do some tracking and maybe get ahead of it in that kind of way. Chair, I'm going to skip to the last question because it's more relevant, it follows better, and then I'll do question 20. So similarly, Martin Lewis has been speaking up about the potential risks to people about the lifetime ISA scheme. So this is where you could save up with a different ISA product. And people are doing this, but also finding that they're not getting anywhere near the ability to use that for a house deposit, which they're supposed to do, because the cost of homes is exceeding the amount of savings they managed to put in there. They face penalties for withdrawing the money, though. So he has suggested that this might be negatively impacting Londoners in particular. And again, I wanted to check: are you in touch with anybody, Martin Lewis himself, or the people who are raising these issues and planning to do anything to support them?
It's not been raised with me. I mean, I can't recall a single contact either from a member of the public or indeed Martin Lewis about this. I mean, again, what I would say is all these things like this, which are sort of designed to as a kind of demand side measure for housing. I'm just not convinced. I'm not really convinced that that's the way we should be going. If the government's going to be investing in housing, the government should be investing much more into the supply side for housing than it should be into the demand side. But as I say, I have not had any contact from anyone who is concerned about this.
And I should say also, there's another issue with the scheme. These are all very complicated. These schemes, they tend to be.
Because I think the lifetime ISA, isn't it? It's for first time buyers, or you have to leave it in until you retire. Is that the?
I can't. It doesn't actually say in front of me on the rundown.
I think you can, but then of course you end up having to. You might need the money in the meantime.
Yeah. Well, the other issue is that there is a maximum eligible property value, and that's why that's particularly affecting London. So once the kind of homes people are looking at are all above that level, people are wanting to withdraw their money, but they can't. So that's the other thing they could do, is raise the threshold.
Well, I'm glad you flagged it with me, because again, perhaps in alongside having a look at some of the issues around Help to Buy, we might have a look at some of the issues around the lifetime ISA, because I can't recall. I think it's the cap is £450,000, as in the house price can be up to £450,000. So yes, if that's not being uprated, or if it's only being uprated, say, by inflation rather than by London house prices, then that's going to lead to fewer and fewer properties available naturally.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. And then my final question is, what is the Mayor's position on the First Homes programme?
Against it. Shall I elaborate?
Chair, are we short of time? Do we need to?
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. I agree.
The Mayor has been consistently against First Homes. Certainly in London. I mean, I don't know. Perhaps this will stack up elsewhere in the country. I'm not convinced, but certainly in London, I do not see how it can work. I don't even see how the finances of it could stack up beyond a very small handful of boroughs once you take into account the income cap and the property price cap. You'd probably be looking at just some very small properties in some outer London boroughs. I see absolutely no demand for it from. I don't know there are any London boroughs in London that are crying out to have this delivered in their areas. It's the wrong product for London.
That's very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Deputy Mayor, can I just give you Assembly Member Emma?
Okay. As we've been talking, I just wanted to ask you, Deputy Mayor Copley, about what wider, broader policy interventions need to be made elsewhere in order to impact housing so positively. And I'm thinking about this because I think recently it's been reported that there is nowhere in London where a two-person household earning an average income can afford to buy a house or a flat. And so that means that the average household in London cannot afford to buy the home that they live in if they're renting, and they can't afford to move out of home if they want to move on and start their lives in terms of settling down, having a family, and so on. And the upshot of this over time has been that they're leaving the capital. That has had huge impacts in the last few weeks, months rather, with, for example, school rolls falling. I know in my constituency we have had to sadly discuss the amalgamation of some excellent schools because we don't have enough children in those areas, and that's also partly due to people leaving because of Brexit. But there are, that's a huge issue, and so I wonder, people like the institutional investors who put forward funding to build new homes, and the terms that they agree, people like mortgage providers, the current system that we have in place that may sort of work outside of London for people to be able to borrow money to buy a home, it clearly, objectively, is broken across all of London to support people. The mortgage system now is broken as well, and I just wonder what conversations, if any could be had between City Hall and those key players in the industry, and to make sure that people can actually buy homes, be they shared ownership or open market sale.
Well, things are very, very bleak at the moment, Assembly Member Moema, as you say, and they're very, very bleak in terms of construction as well. As you know, we've had rising materials costs, labour shortages, we've had Brexit, we've had the war in Ukraine, we've had the fiscal event. Everything really has been conspiring towards making it harder and harder to solve the problem that you've just set out. I don't see any way around it other than some, very serious and very bold interventions that will require some, leadership nationally. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is the opposite of that. So, for example, abolishing housing targets, which is caving into, backbench interests rather than doing something that would actually help young people. It's young people who are being hit the hardest by the lack of housing supply. The last thing you should be doing is abolishing housing targets, which will make it easier for people opposed to development to block it in their areas. So we're kind of getting the opposite of what we need nationally. I think you could get, you could build quite an alliance between, I think, those of us who wish to get on and build, including those of us who wish to get on and build significant amounts of social housing. That will require the investment in affordable housing. It will require the investment in infrastructure as well. Things like the, things that will really help us, like the DLR extension through Beckton down to Thamesmead. The Bakerloo line extension, Crossrail. We need to be delivering on these infrastructure projects as well that will allow us to unlock more sites for delivery. In terms of this government, we don't seem to be in that place at the moment in terms of bold thinking. We are actually having some positive conversations with them about the DLR extension, but beyond that, it's very, very difficult at the moment.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Just, I want to take you back a question or two, Deputy Mayor. If and when you do have a look at shared ownership and Help to Buy, as someone who's been in both of those schemes, I will tell you that shared ownership, it feels more complicated than Help to Buy. There seems to be many more hidden costs as well. When I looked at my own personal finances, Help to Buy was better than shared ownership. And I only give you that cautionary tale because you said you was ambivalent at best about Help to Buy. But for many families, that freedom is a freedom. And also, when you're making the comparison, make sure you look at the percentage of ownership, because that's where the maths looks different when people take into account how much of this shared ownership property I actually own and how much I'm paying rent on versus the fact that I would own significantly more if I did Help to Buy. And why that's important, because when you get to the period where you have to pay, you then have the option to downsize, upsize, move, because you can sell so much more to house. So I just...
Without wanting to be... That way to be cheeky, Chair, I recall a certain mayoral candidate who promised to build 100,000 shared ownership homes if he won the election.
But that particular mayoral candidate, he was a wonderful young man, if I remember correctly.
Can I say
he promised to do it at a reduced cost.
I think the issue is, I've no doubt that well, we've got the figures that people have benefited from it in London. But they have perhaps benefited from it at the same time that the scheme has been pushing up prices, making the overall problem worse, and that there are perhaps better ways in which people could be helped into home ownership.
Again, Deputy Mayor, we could argue if it pushed up the price, if it didn't. That's a separate argument. What I'm suggesting is if you find yourself doing any analysis, be even-handed. Look at the complications of actually
of
paying
course.
those bills. That's what I'm saying.
Sorry, I take your point.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying one scheme's better than the other. That's an estimation you can make for yourself. I just say the tone of this conversation seemed to skew one way. Assembly Member Devonish.
I had to say something after all that, but you know, Mr. Khan, I'm sure will be making the case for housing. He doesn't make many housing speeches, does he, Deputy Mayor? But I've got one question to finish anyway. You haven't as yet set any targets for your 21-26 affordable homes programme. When do you think you will actually do so?
Well, I'm hoping to do so very soon. There's a reason why we haven't, which is that because of the very big time lag between the bids being finalised and the government allowing us to get into contract, the world kind of moved on. So then the government said, go and reprofile the delivery of the scheme, which we are, I think, tantalisingly close to have finalised now and agreed with the department. And once that's done, we can, of course, share with you some targets for the rest of the programme.
I look forward to seeing that, and I'm sure I no doubt the government will always to blame in every question, but they're doing a good job. They're doing good job behind the scenes, aren't they? So thank you. I'll finish on that, Chair.
Thank you, Assembly Member Devonish. And I'd like to take this point to thank both of our guests for all their contributions today. We have come to a formal end almost. I release you to the world. Of course, you are welcome to stay and listen to our official business, but you both look like you have busy jobs to get back to. Can we note the report and today's discussion?
Noted.
Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party lead members to agree any output arising from this discussion?
Agreed.
Can we note the work programme and our meeting dates agreed by the London Assembly on May the 4th, 2023?
Agreed.
That brings me to the date of the next meeting of the Housing Committee, which is scheduled for the 27th of June 2023 at 10 a.m. in this chamber. I have no urgent business. I declare this meeting closed.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.